Okay, now that you've pulled the water pump off the engine of the Model A, the next step is either you get, if you're going to get your water pump replaced or repaired or modified, updated, whatever, before you put it back on the car, you need to get all the gasket material off, and you need to make sure the surfaces of both the water pump and the manifold for the Model A are clean and smooth, so you can glue a new gasket back on so your water pump doesn't leak. So these, let me see if I can get to these. Okay, so this is some remnants of the old gasket. So you can see here, this needs to be basically scraped off for the parts that stick. You may lightly sand it. You don't want to have anything really too abrasive on here, but you want to make sure that that's smooth and shiny when you get there. So I'm going to do that next. The tools, you can pick anything. I would not use a chisel, by the way. So here I have two things. I have a scraper. This is sort of like a putty scraper. You can buy this at any hardware store. And I also have, this is a razor blade. It's basically a little, I don't know what to call this, but you take individual razor blades and you can put them into something where you can hold a handle on it and then use it as a scraping motion. I may use one or both of these. I'll find out as I go, but I'm not going to videotape me scraping off a gasket. That could take a long time. But when I'm done, I'll show you what it looks like before I glue it back together. That will be the next step. One more quick tip as I started this. To prevent any debris from going back into the engine as you scrape off the manifold, you might, as a tip, want to take a towel and put it in the hole right here where the water comes out. That'll prevent any material getting in there that might fall in as you're scraping the edges for the gasket and gasket residue to come off. Turns out I don't have, most of the gasket came off pretty easy. I'm just using the little razor blade to get, you probably can't see it here, but around the bolts there's some adhesive that I want to get off there. Be careful about the threads as you're scraping and cleaning. You don't want to inadvertently damage these threads, because then you'll have bigger problems trying to get the pump back on. Well, this finished up rather well. I have now finished cleaning and scraping all the gasket and the glue off the surface here where the water pump will mount. And as you can see, nice and shiny. You want to make everything as smooth. One thing that helped is I found some sandpaper. This is a 320 grit or 320. It's a very fine sandpaper. So I had some 280. So 300 or higher would be safe to use on here. It really helped remove some of the extra gasket and glue that was around these bolts. The nice thing about the very fine sandpaper also is it won't damage the threads on the bolts, and it made everything very nice. And then what I did was I took a rag, a clean rag, and then cleaned off all the dust and metal particles. Don't use a rag that has any residue on it like oil or any other cleaner. Just a clean dry rag will do. So this is all set to go. Next step will be I'll show you the steps for getting ready to put the gasket on. Okay, now you're ready to put the gasket on, to glue the water pump back onto the Model A engine. I want to show you the surface here. This is the water pump, this is the back side. So you can see I nicely scraped and cleaned. That fine grit sandpaper definitely was handy to give it that polish finish and make sure it was very smooth without actually damaging the metal. So that's all ready to go. And this is a gasket for the Model A. Make sure you get the right year for your car. This is some Gasket Sealer, so I'm not advertising any particular one. I will point out you don't need a expensive, this is a low, the operating temperature for the Model A water pump, it probably would never, even if it overheated, it might get 250 degrees. There's gaskets that can seal, there's sealants you can buy for 500, 600 degree temperature. Your Model A engine would melt probably before it ever got that hot. Also, you don't need to have a gasket that can have to worry about the manifold side with touching gasoline or any kind of petroleum. The only thing your water pump will touch is water, any antifreeze or coolant you have mixed with your water. So you don't need a very expensive gasket sealer for this. And these gaskets are pretty cheap. You can buy them through any Model A catalog dealer or online. And that's it. The next step, I'm going to show you gluing the well, it'll be hard to glue and hold the camera at the same time. We'll see what I can do, but I may show you the finished product after I glue it on. We'll see. This is one optional thing you can do as you're replacing your water pump. If the paint around your outtake valve and around the block, if it needs a little touch-up, you can mask off the areas you don't want to get paint on and just spray paint that, touch up a little bit. Again, you don't have to do this. If you do decide to touch up, make sure the paint matches. This is the official Model A green paint you're supposed to use. It's called Antique Ford Green, so make sure you use that. And I tried to tape off as much as I can. I won't spend too much time on this. So just make it a little bit nicer, because once everything's back on, I'll never have a chance to get in these little cracks and crevices. So just a small optional step as you're working on your water pump. Okay, so what I've done since last time is, this is the gasket sealer, and the instructions are to make sure you put the gasket sealant around the contact surface and also around the bolt holes. So make sure you put it around where the outside edges where the bolts will go as well. It helps to, this gets a little gooey, helps to have a rag. The gasket only goes one way, so there's a top and bottom to it. It's pretty easy to figure out. You just look, the bottom is a little bigger than the top. So you just slide this on here like that. And then the next step will be to, I put some glue on the other contact surface. So the next step will be to put this on there and glue it together and then bolt it in. And so I will do that next. And just real quick, that's the other, that's the rest of the gasket sealer I put on the other surface that the water pump will attach to. Again, make sure you get all around the bolts as well. Okay, this is the last, I'm losing light for the evening, so hopefully you can see this okay. The water pump is now back on, installed. This could be a new pump you put on, or it could be your old pump that's being refurbished or maintained or update, whatever. So I did learn a good lesson putting this back on. So let me show you. You can see a little bit of the blue gasket. I just put it on, so I tightened all 4 bolts. I tightened them evenly, so that means, you know, don't tighten one real tight and the other one's like, do them all a little bit at a time so you get an even seal. The lesson I learned, and here's I went through several, this is the second rag, but I probably put too much gasket seal on there, and that was one potential thing. The other thing is, when you put the gasket on, I put it on, I showed you in the last video, I put on the pump. You really should, that didn't work out well. You should put the gasket on the engine first. So you put the glue on there, you put the gasket on there first, and then you put the pump on afterwards. And make sure there's gasket seal both on the pump surface and the engine surface, this manifold. The reason for that is when I put the gasket on the pump first, it slides a bit and the holes don't align. And if they don't align just right, they're not going to slide over the bolt. So as I'm trying to slide this water pump onto the engine, there's gasket seal, it's very gooey, it goes everywhere, and I had to basically, you didn't see this on video, I had to pull the pump off, take the gasket off, which was covered in gasket seal, put it on the engine block, then put the pump back on, put the nuts on there and tighten them down. So If I were doing this again, that would be my lesson. You didn't get to see it on the video, but it was quite messy, so you get to skip a lot of the drama there. Now that you've installed the water pump back on your Model A, and see how nice that looks, you're ready to reverse the process of everything to put it back together again. So the good news is the hard work is done. This should be the easier steps to put everything back together. That includes putting the Model A fan belt on. That includes putting the radiator support rods back on, the hoses, the hose clamps, and of course the hood at the very end. So let's walk through some of this real quick. I won't do all the steps, but just show you some of the steps. For your Model A fan belt, inspect it before you put it back on. Make sure it's not frayed or worn. This one's in good shape. If you need to get a new one, go ahead and do that. They're not expensive. You can still move the radiator by hand, so this makes it easier to put the fan belt back on. Be careful, again, it doesn't bump the front of your water pump, this bolt or cotter pin here. And you just take the radiator fan belt and you just put it back in the grooves where the wheels are here. So the top pump here, the flywheel down here, and then whether you have a generator or an alternator, I have an alternator. Once this is loose, you can see it slides back. It moves back and forth. So what you can do is before you tighten everything up, you put the belt around here first and make sure that slips over okay. Like that. So now the fan belt's around all three wheels, the water pump groove, the flywheel down here, and your generator or your alternator, depending what you have. Then what I'll do is I'll pull this back real tight, use my wrenches, and then tighten that down so this belt is nice and tight, not a lot of slack here. Then your next step would be your radiator support rods. So you've got two of these rods, one on each side, that basically hold the radiator in place relative to the hood. So the hood can go on here. So you'll go ahead and actually before you would put these on, I would put the radiator, the top radiator hose here, not tighten it down, but just put it in place so it fits. And then as you put in the radiator rods and adjust them and tighten them down, you'll have some slack here, so this will move back and forth with the hose attached before you tighten everything down. And then your last step, of course, will be to put the hood back on. Okay, so now we're at the point in the project of taking out and putting back in the Model A water pump to put the radiator hoses back on. Notice that the radiator support rods are not back in place yet, so with these off, it allows me to move the radiator. I can tilt it, which makes it much easier to put the hoses on and adjust and fit them before I tighten everything down. Make sure you put a towel or cardboard or something in the front here so it doesn't damage the radiator as you tilt it forward. For the top radiator hose, make sure your hose clamps are facing the right direction, so you don't want one facing one way or one the other way. You want to stay in one spot and get to both screws. Also, if I suggested earlier, I forgot, the project goes easier to put the hoses on if you put a little bit of grease on each end of the hose. This is water pump grease for a Model A, but any similar kind of water resistant grease will do. Just take your finger like that, put just enough around the inside edge of each end of the radiator hose. It allows it to slide on and off much easier. In fact, makes it much easier. So I will First slide the, it doesn't matter which order, but I'll do the bottom one first. So see how easy that goes on with the grease? Believe me, it's much more difficult when you don't have grease on there. From the top, because I can tilt the radiator, I can position this. So I have everything lined up. Now, don't tighten the screws, don't tighten the clamps just yet. So put everything in place. Then you will put your bottom return pipe feed on there with its radiator hoses as well, which I already have started and finished. Don't tighten everything down until you get the radiator rods in place. You want everything tightened up, and then you put the hoses, you tighten the hose clamps last. That'll give you room to adjust if necessary, to straighten the radiator or to get the rods correct for the hood to go on. And let me just show you real quick down below. I saved some time. You can't see it. Let's see if I can tilt down here. Yep, and there it is right there. So I put the bottom part. This is the pipe that takes the water from the bottom of the radiator after it's cooled. The cooled water goes back into the, returns into the engine here. And the hose clamps here on each side. This down below is called a Petcock valve. This is the water release valve. So when you're draining the water out of the Model A, that's the little device there that you'll use to do that. There's no danger of putting it on incorrectly. If you had the pipe reversed, the Petcock would not be the lowest point in the pipe. So if for some reason you get mixed up when you put the pipe back on, you'll know which way it goes, because the position where it's lowest in the pipe, that's the correct position. And again, this is loose. I have not tightened it up. So it's all ready to go when I put the radiator support rods on in preparation for the hood. Okay, we're at the point now that we are ready to check the connections for the radiator hoses. So one thing to notice is the radiator support rods are now in place. So once these are in place and you've got the radiator lined up the way you want, you can start tightening the hose connections for the top and bottom. I'm going to show you a little trick to test for water leaks before you actually run the engine. So what you do is, once you got the rods in place, you can add a little bit of water at a time. So this container is almost empty, but I've been adding just a bit of water, probably a quart of water so far. Enough water to run down to the bottom and start filling up. Let me show you. To start filling up the lower part. So I have enough water in here now where it basically is, there's water in this bottom pipe here, just enough to come up to start testing the connections where this little hose is and where this hose is here. I'm also testing the Petcock valve, the water valve, to see if that leaks as well, because this is a new pipe for me. You can, this is, let me see. This is just distilled or purified water that I'm using in my Model A. I haven't blended it with anything yet, like propylene or ethylene glycol, which is a radiator coolant. I'll talk more about that later when we get to that point. So all you have to do is just slowly add some of this at a time. And try not to get any in your overflow valve. And then I'm going to let that sit a bit, but the idea is I'm going to check these connections down here. Now earlier I did find a leak in the bottom hose that's closest to the radiator. So let me try to zoom in here. Let's see if that works. Of all the connections you want to check, this one down here that's closest to the radiator on the bottom, this is the hardest to get to, and it's also the one that's trickiest to fit on. So you want to make sure that this is on there good and tight and not leaking before you fill up the whole system and put everything back together. Because if this leaks, it goes all over the place. If this one leaks over here, that's not good either, but at least there's a skirt or a side pan by the engine to collect that and run it down there if you have a water container. So right now I just have a bit of water, probably maybe a quart to a half a gallon in the system. I'm going to check the bottom pipe and hose fixes, the bottom Petcock valve. If I'm pretty sure that's not leaking, then what I can do is put more water in the radiator, fill it up all the way, and test this connection up here. And then when I start the engine and run it, I'll have a greater sense of confidence that nothing will leak once everything starts. I'm going to make a few corrections to my videotape for removing the water pump. This is after the fact. I finished that project, but as I'm working on another Model A, I wanted to point out some things, either corrections or updates. The first thing is the water pump is connected not technically to the block of the engine, it's to the head. So the water pump connects to the head, and the head removes from the block. In my earlier video, I said it's attached to the block. I mean, technically it's the engine overall, but to be more correct, the water pump is attached to the head, and the head is attached, is like upper block, lower block. So anyway, I just wanted to clarify that. The other thing I didn't cover is how to remove the fan blade from the Model A, and this may stick, so after you take off the nut and the cotter pin, the blade may not slide off. That's okay. The way you get that off is you want to take a good size hammer, not a small hammer, and you want to protect. This is the fan blade. This is the pulley on the fan blade. The pulley is where the belt sits. You want to tap it on the back side of the pulley, and you want to use something to cover the metal, or else you'll scratch or chip the paint off. So a shop towel or rag, a piece of rubber, anything to provide a little impact. And you just slowly tap around, you rotate, slowly tap it. I already did it, it already came off. So, and when it comes off, it'll fall. So you might want to put something down here like a towel to catch it, because it'll just pop off when it falls. When you take the fan blade off, there is oh, you can't see, there's a key. It's hard to see, but there's actually a little key right here that pops in and out, and I can take that out with some pliers or something. But this key is there, so don't ever try to take off the fan blade by twisting the shaft. That will not get it off at all. You have to pull it out, and then you got to remove this little key right here. There's a little slot in the shaft that keeps the blade from slipping on the shaft. And one final thing, when you take off the fan blade, you want to inspect. This is whether it's a 2 or a 4 blade fan, but no matter what it is, you want to inspect the fan blade very closely for any cracks, any hairline cracks. That's why they recommend that you paint this gloss black paint color, so you can easily see if there's any cracks. This is a newer made fan blade. It's in good condition, so it's not the original one. It's aluminum, it's very lightweight. But no matter if you have an old or a new fan blade, you want to check if there are any cracks in the fan blade at the base, on the inside, on the outside, because something very dangerous that can happen, and this happens in Model A's, is a fan blade where the integrity is not good. One of the blades, one or more of the blades, can actually, while it's spinning, can fly off, and it can do dangerous things. It's gone through Model A hoods, it's gone through firewalls, and if you're working on your Model A while the engine is running, that could be dangerous for you. So anyway, real quick, so again, you just take the hammer, protect the back of the pulley, keep tapping it till it comes off. When you take off the fan blade, inspect for any cracks, and then you're good to go on your project. Okay, adding this to my series of water pump videos. So you may put a water pump on your Model A with a new head, or you're taking the studs off the head and putting them back in. So this is a quick video clip to show you if you got a new head, it won't have any studs in there. So the original the studs for the water pump mount look like this. The wide threads go into the head, and there'll be 4 of them, and you just tighten them up there. Before you put these in, you want to put anti-seize lubricant on there. So you put some of this, I don't have it out yet, but you smear some of this with a glove and you put them in. That way if you ever take them out later, they come out easier. Now you can also get a modern, so here's the thing. I bought a set of modern screws that will, they're like welded nuts on the end and they screw in, and it makes it easier to get your water pump on and off in the future. I thought I ordered them. I can't find them anywhere. I've got 2 sets of these, so I'm going to use one. What's going to happen is I'm going to put this all together using these water pump mounting studs, and I'll find the other parts later that I ordered. So, oh well. It's either that or wait a few more days for shipping for a small order. But anyway, and this is where, and once you have 4 of these put in, the water pump, again, the fins here, what is this called? The impeller goes inside the head like that. So it'll just go on like that. It should fit nice. And don't forget to use your gasket and sealant on your gasket.